The Hangar podcast welcomes the founder and president of Citizens Behind the Badge, Craig Floyd.
See, I view the job we did at the Memorial Fund as just such a positive because, we can't change the tragic part of the story. This person has died suddenly, terrible loss, families devastated, etc. But what we can do is honor them in an important way.
Welcome to the Hangar podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor Plus. This episode is being released during Police Week 2026, a time set aside to honor the brave men and women in law enforcement who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to others. It's a week of reflection, remembrance, and gratitude for all our fallen brothers and sisters. Today's guest is someone who has dedicated much of his life to ensuring those sacrifices are never forgotten. Craig Floyd. This is Craig's second time joining us on the podcast. The last time we spoke in May of 2024, we were standing together in the rain at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., a fitting backdrop for a man who has been such a powerful voice for the fallen. Craig is the founder and president of Citizens Behind the Badge and the original chief executive officer of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. His work has had lasting impact on how our nation honors its law enforcement heroes. In this episode, we take a deeper dive into the incredible story behind the creation of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Judiciary Square. We explore the original vision of NYPD legend Mario Biaggi, who later served as a U.S. representative, and how Craig's time working for him as a legislative assistant helped set this monumental project in motion. What followed was decades of dedication, perseverance, and relentless effort to bring this vision to life. An extraordinary achievement completed without government funding. This is a fascinating behind-the-scenes conversation about what it truly takes to build something that stands as a lasting tribute to sacrifice, service, and honor. You will not want to miss this conversation. Thank you to our sponsors, Becker Avionics, Onboard Systems Hoist and Winch, Robinson Helicopters.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor Plus. I'm your host, Jack Shanley. With me today for this episode is the creator of the Hangar Z podcast, John Gray. John, how are you?
Hello, sir. Very good. Very good. Very good to see you, and honored to be back with Craig Floyd.
Yeah.
Our first conversation with Craig was actually in Washington, D.C., and was really, really impactful. One of the probably the most impactful moments that I've had to be at the memorial with you and with Craig and with Brent to talk. So really, really cool to be here again.
Good. Well, we're going to talk about that right off the top with Craig. But before we get there, let me just welcome Craig Floyd, who's the founder and president of Citizens Behind the Badge. Craig, welcome back to the Hangar Z podcast.
Yeah, it's so good to be with you guys. We had a blast last time down at the Memorial during National Police Week. It was a little rainy that day, but we had a great discussion. I'm glad we're going to revisit it.
Us too. We talked about doing this that day. We said we got to have you on again, and so it came time where we're starting to think down the line in 2026. And I said we got to call Craig, and we have to release it for Police Week. So that's the goal. If you're listening and watching this, it is the beginning of Police Week 2026 when this comes out. So, but let's start with that conversation. It was episode 214. It's one of those episodes that we encourage our followers to watch it has much more impact. There was a lot of photos, a lot of video, and it was a video podcast in the rain of Craig and I chatting at the National Memorial, passing the umbrella back and forth, as I recall, Craig.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Tell us your thoughts about that conversation that day.
Well, you know what I loved most about it, Jack, was able to reflect and revisit on some of those memorable moments in my career as the founding CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Here we are. It was dedicated in 1991. So what does that make it? About 35 years old now this year. There have been so many moments that just impact you as an individual, as a human being, memories that you will take to your grave, and how people, have been resilient. I met so many survivors over the years of these fallen officers that we honor on that memorial. And, to see them devastated that first year, the life sucked out of them almost. And then see them grow. One survivor once told me, they said, the first year I came for my husband because I was just too devastated. Life was just spinning, and it wasn't really for me. It was to honor him. And then the second year I came back, and that was for me, for my healing. And they engaged in counseling sessions with concerns of police survivors, and they met other survivors and police officers, and they saw how much they were cared for by so many people. And then the third year, she said, I came back to help other survivors heal. And I've never forgotten that. And I think that's so true that, that first year you see these spouses, parents, young children, of course, that just tug at your heartstrings and tear you up. But then you see them come back, and they start to get stronger and start to get better. And that's a wonderful thing to see and experience. And I've seen that over so many years now that gives me hope, that as much as we can be torn up as human beings and devastated by whatever life throws at you, there's a resilience in all of us that allows us, a strength that allows us to recover and go on with life and hopefully enjoy life. And that to me is really one of the special things about that memorial.
Yeah, I've seen exactly what you just described, Craig, with several people I know where they went through that sequence of grieving and remembrance, and they end up being advocates, and they end up being people that are really influential in assisting other survivors, just like you described. I think there's a lot of people that do that. Some don't. Obviously, it's too painful. Some people handle it differently, but it's great that so many of them go that route because they know the pain. That I don't understand that pain. I mean, I've lost friends, but I don't understand the pain of that these survivors go through at that memorial service and the candlelight vigil and all that. But they bounce back and help others. That is so nice. I'm glad that you've observed that so many times.
And Jack, I just did a podcast I do every week. It's called Heroes Live Forever, and I talk about a fallen officer. I tell their story. I talk about their loved ones left behind. I talk about what happened after their death, the inspiration that many of these officers have left as a legacy. And this past week, I did one on an officer from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. His name was Robert Bolton, and he was killed in the line of duty and he in a domestic violence situation, which we know is the most dangerous call a police officer can go on. And it was at a domestic violence shelter for women. And his wife, Lynn, after his death, she took a while to recover. But 2 years after his death, she became the first national president of Concerns of Police Survivors. And she made sure that survivors never walk alone. And she really set a precedent that's been followed over these many years by many other survivors who become president of cops. And Lynn's story is inspirational. And also they named the women's shelter that he was killed at they named it after him. And
Wow.
thousands of women have gone to that shelter, seeing his name. And that's another part of his legacy. So, yeah, these are incredible stories about how survivors do recover and go on to heal others. And Lynn Bolton Bebo is her name now. She's remarried, but Lynn Bebo has been such an inspiration to me and so many others.
Yes. John, what do you remember about that day that we were standing at the wall with Craig?
I mean, it was both somber, but also an immense feeling of pride as we're standing there, being a part of the community of police officers that have paid the ultimate sacrifice. I feel like it's a pilgrimage that most or all law enforcement officers should make to one, respect those that have paid the ultimate price, but to gain some perspective on our profession and what it means, and especially what it means to those that have lost a loved one. Craig, as you so succinctly talked as we opened this up about the recovery that you've witnessed in survivors, to me, that provided a strong glimpse of hope for folks that are in a position where they've recently lost somebody, or we're in a community where there's no shortage of loss. While today we may not have lost somebody, tomorrow that could be an entirely different situation. So the words that you just spoke, for someone who, again, who hasn't experienced that yet but is going to, I think will offer some hope. And hope's is the most powerful emotion that exists in my opinion. Hope overcomes fear, and that's the most powerful thing that somebody can hear is those words of hope. So thank you for providing that, and for all you do for the families that have lost a loved one.
Yeah, that day was very special, Craig. I mean, people need to go back and watch it. It really is unique and special. And I thought it was appropriate. It was raining because it is that kind of place. I've been there in the rain a bunch of times, and it's quieter. There's not as many people there. And this was right at the conclusion of Police Week that we did that. And it just hits you a little bit harder, I think, in the rain. I've sat there with a survivor in the rain, and I'll never forget that conversation, just like I will never forget the conversation with you, Craig. And I'll note one other thing about that conversation that day. We really concentrated that day on a lot of different things about the memorial, but we also talked about the 419, I think it's 420 now, or 21 aviation accidents because of the Hangar Z connection. And we were stunned that there were that many on, names from aviation accidents over the years on that wall when we did the research for that conversation. And we were aviators, and we were stunned. But that was very special to talk about that. And you recalled a few specific ones related to that, thankfully, and we really appreciated that. So thanks again for that conversation that day. That was special, very, very special.
Thank you for saying so. And we may get into it later, but I as you say that, I just can't help but think of two stories really that tie in so nicely with that. Martha Wood is a very special friend of mine, and she's a survivor of a fallen officer named Barry Wood. He was a Baltimore City police officer flying a helicopter on the day of his death. Unfortunately, experienced mechanical problems, and the helicopter crashed. His partner lived because he was able to navigate that helicopter enough as it crashed to avoid injuring anyone on the ground, and in fact saving the life of his partner. And Barry Wood is a special name that is right here in my heart all the time, because I've become so close to Martha. And she was one of those stories I mentioned that devastated after Barry's loss. They were high school sweethearts. They had spent their whole life together, loved each other to death. And then when he left us, boy, she was so devastated. And I saw Martha go from that point up until where she was volunteering at the memorial and helping other survivors with that experience during National Police Week. And Martha's become a special friend. And then, of course, the Police Unity Tour, which you've been a part of for many years, that all started because of two aviators in Florham Park, New Jersey, who died in the line of duty in a aircraft crash. And they were looking for marijuana fields, actually, at the time of their crash and death. And those two officers were the reason Pat Montori, who founded the Police Unity Tour, he felt like those officers had been forgotten about in his own community of Florham Park, New Jersey. And he wanted to do something to honor and remember them, as well as all the other fallen officers who may have been forgotten. And so really, aviation had a lot to do with the Police Unity Tours, first of all, and have impacted me in many ways as well, between Martha and that experience in Florham Park, where my wife is from, actually. That's where she grew up, and that's where I met her. So
Wow.
it's a very special place, special story.
Lots of connections there. That's interesting. Yep. That it's so many connections to Florham Park and to Pat and to the incident and to what you did and the Unity Tour. That's really cool. We're going to talk about Unity Tour a little bit later, and 30th anniversary is this year, and we'll discuss that. I'll just mention very quickly before we get back to our discussion that from the Hangar Z, we send our condolences to Arizona DPS. They lost 2 troopers just a couple of weeks ago before this recording in a helicopter crash while working an active shooter call. And it's a devastating incident. They just had at least one of the funerals and the flybys, and it just breaks your heart that those 2 troopers' names are going to be added to the wall at some point. And it's so important to remember something. That's one of the themes for today, is remembering our fallen, and no one helps us do that better than the man who's a guest today, Craig Floyd. And we'll get to the memorial here in a few minutes, but we're going to start with today. What you're doing today, Craig. You are the founder and president of Citizens Behind the Badge. Tell us about Citizens Behind the Badge. What caused you to get that ball rolling, and talk about what you're doing and the evolution of that organization.
Well, I think you know the story, Jack, but I'll share it with your audience that I retired from the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund at the end of 2018. We had just dedicated the National Law Enforcement Museum. The memorial was well entrenched in our society, and National Police Week and all the other things that went with it. We had become the premier organization to promote law enforcement safety and wellness. So basically, I felt like my job was done. I had achieved all the major goals that I had set out to do. And it was time to pass the torch to someone else at the Memorial Fund. And I was going to retire, spend a little more time with family and friends, and play golf and enjoy the beach and do all those things you're supposed to do in retirement. And for about a year and a half, that worked out beautifully. I was having a grand old time. And then something happened. May 25th, 2020, a guy named George Floyd died. And of course, we know that story. And almost overnight, it seemed, cops were hated in this country by a vocal minority, I might point out. They were making a lot of noise. And of course, we all heard the stories: defund the police, abolish the police, reimagine the police. The police were brutal racists. And I'm hearing all this, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, that's not true. That's a lie. I mean, I know the facts. I know the figures. I know the men and women who serve in law enforcement. I've met thousands of them over the years. I know what's in their heart. I know what they do and how they do it. And they're professionals, and they're doing an amazing job.
Meet Becker Avionics DVCS 6100 Plus, a world-class digital intercom delivering crystal clear mission-ready audio. The DVCS 6100 Plus supports up to 12 transceivers and offers immersive 3D audio and NBIS compatibility. Designed to be scalable, dependable, and prepared to support military or commercial operations in the toughest of high workload mission environments. Visit us at beckerusa.com.
In 2019, for instance, the year before George Floyd's death and the defund the police movement started, this was one of the safest years in the history of this country. All right. And it's because police were doing such a great job. They were better prepared for the dangers and the difficulties of the job than ever before. They had the equipment and the weaponry and the technology to do even better than they had been doing. And everything was going along beautifully. And all of a sudden, George Floyd dies, and now we're basically saying, let's blow it all up and start all over again because they're not doing a very good job. And I knew that wasn't true. And I knew we had put over 24,000 names on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, men and women who were willing to die for the safety and protection of others. And did that sacrifice not matter in this equation and in the mindset of these folks? It was just all wrong. And so I said, they need a voice of support. They need somebody that knows them well and can be their advocate and can mobilize and amplify the voice of the American people who do support them, who do respect them. And that's the vast majority of Americans in this country, by the way. So I started a new organization. I said, enough of retirement. It's going to have to wait. I started a group called Citizens Behind the Badge. And the name says it all. I wanted to get the citizens in this country rallying to support the men and women in law enforcement, to give them the respect they deserve and to get them the resources they need to do their job safely and effectively. And I think over the last 6 years now, we're in business. We've done just that. I mean, all of a sudden, after 2 or 3 years of us pounding the message that this defund the police movement is wrong, we countered all the media lies in social media posts and press releases and media interviews. We have a great website that everybody should go to, by the way. It's called behindthebadge.org. And you'll see the stories of heroism and sacrifice, and you'll see all the facts and figures. We have over 300 posts that we did in a section of our website called The Troubling Consequences of the Defund the Police Movement. All right, so example after example of how this defund the police movement and defame the police has created a crisis in this country. Crime was rampant. Homicides went up almost 30% the first year of the defund the police movement after George Floyd's death. And officers left the profession in droves. A lot of experienced veterans, leaders of law enforcement agencies said, enough is enough. If they hate me and the political leaders of our jurisdiction are not supporting me, why should I go out and risk my life for this profession? And so we lost about 40,000 cops. That's how far below the pre-2020 levels of law enforcement we experienced in this country. 40,000 fewer officers patrolling the streets of America, and crime went up dramatically, as you would expect, right?
Sure.
And so that's where we are. And thankfully, we've gotten people to refund the police, and now we're seeing crime way down. We're seeing more people that want to become police officers joining the profession. Fewer cops are leaving, and we're in a much better place. And I'd like to think CBB had something to do with that.
Absolutely had something to do with it. It's just about getting facts out. Like you said, that's what caused you to do this. You saw the lies. We all saw them. Every cop in America listened and watched and went, well, that's not true. And that's not true. And that's not true. You did it every day. But yet it got traction. And that's what's so great about Citizens Behind the Badge. You provide that the facts, the truth, and for those willing to listen, which is most of America, they can learn. I think the education factor of the organization is so critical, because the average American doesn't have contact with the police that much unless they have a family member or they're a victim. I mean, they get pulled over. They don't have contact. They don't know the people and the stories. And your stories that you highlight are incredible. And I'll correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, you've got plenty of things to choose from in that category. It's probably hard to decide which people you're going to profile. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. It's it's actually a pleasure to be able to look at all the cases that I've come across or that I'm learning about, and picking one or two each week or each day, really, in some cases, to highlight in our social media posts, in our Substack articles that we write, in our podcast, The Heroes Live Forever, which honors the fallen, as well as Heroes Behind the Badge, which honors living heroes in law enforcement and telling their stories. So I love what I get to do, which is just tell the stories of American law enforcement, tell the stories of the heroes in law enforcement, and just about any cop in America to me is a hero because of the job they do, the risks they take, and the compassion in their heart. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, and I love these people, and I want other members of the public to have the same kind of privilege that I've had.
What Craig won't say, and I'll say, is that organization, Citizens Behind the Badge, with you, with so much credibility that you have, and those that know all about Craig know exactly what I'm talking about. He's been an advocate for us in law enforcement for decades. So the credibility behind your voice, you're such a good speaker. You're such a good representative, such a great advocate from your knowledge, experience, and your demeanor and your professionalism. That's what makes all that stuff that you do successful. I just want to add that. Craig won't, because he's a humble man, but I will tell you that's the key to Citizens Behind the Badge. All those things that they're doing, yes, a lot of people could do those, but this man has so much credibility in that area that it just makes it special. So thank you for doing that, Craig. Thank you.
Those are kind words, Jack. I appreciate it. And you know what I love in a way, we've turned this negative, this defund the police movement into a positive for me personally. We're doing better now today, thankfully. But what I like especially is that I'm back in the game. You know, I thought I'd be retired at the end of the Memorial Fund days, and I would never really do this kind of work ever again. And you know what? That was wrong. I mean, I think I was intended by God and others to kind of serve this role in my life. And I'm so privileged now that I get to balance it. I mean, I'm not quite as, totally immersed in the job as much as I was at the Memorial Fund.
Right.
It allows me time with family, time to do some of the things I never got a chance to do earlier. But I'm able to do something I really find purposeful and meaningful and enjoyable. And so maybe all of that was meant to happen. I don't know.
Maybe it was. John, any thoughts on this part of our conversation?
I just think through the feeling of gratitude that I've got for you and folks like you that are willing to tell the truth and to stick up for the real story behind law enforcement. You know, you talk about American law enforcement. I think this problem is happening across the world. People look at law enforcement and don't want to have a sense of accountability to anybody. So they're just, painting us with a broad stroke and defaming us, like you said. So the fact that you're willing to stick up and tell the truth for a group of people who are doing something bigger than themselves is amazing to me. So thank you for doing that. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
It truly is. And there's always room for improvement in this area where, it's a never ending battle. Although things have turned and are getting better, we still have a battle to go. Every department that we have on, Craig, is shorthanded. There's very few that say, "Oh, we're at full staff." We don't hear that very often. It's a rare event, and many, including my old department, I think there are 1,500 officers down in LA. 1,500. Imagine just, you think about that for a second, and you go, think of all the police cars that are not on the street, patrolling and responding and cutting down response times to calls, and 1,500. I don't know how they do it. But departments are dealing with that even today. But it's getting better, and part of it is certainly thanks to you. So behindthebadge.org.
Well, thank you, Jack. And let me just add to that.
Please do.
You raise a good point that we still are below the levels we need to have safe America. And so many of the major departments are well below their staffing levels. And what I worry about more than anything, and I'm sure you're sensitive to this concern as well, that is, we're trying to hire people in big numbers. And what a lot of departments have done is lower the standards for hiring. They don't have to have the educational requirements they used to. The physical requirements have been lowered. Drug use now is not necessarily a dismissive, factor. These are just examples. But the other thing is we've added a lot of financial incentives to get people to join the law enforcement profession, incentives that weren't necessary before the defund and defame the police movement. People were lining up in droves to become cops in America because they were so well respected. It was a proud profession, and people wanted to be cops. But then it stopped because of the defund movement. And today, now we're throwing money at people to join, people that might not have considered law enforcement as a profession beforehand. So, that worries me a little bit. What are we going to find? Are these people going to remain cops for 20, 30 years and have that institutional knowledge and that experience? Are they going to be good cops, doing the right thing? And do they have the right heart to be a good law enforcement professional, to show compassion and help people in need? These are things that worry me. And I hope, things turn out well. And I think they will. But there's also that brain drain from all the people that left the profession. Good cops, a lot of experience, expertise, and institutional knowledge that we've lost. So these are just some of the things I continue to worry about. As you point out, things are not perfect yet and never will be, but we're getting better anyway. We've turned the corner, perhaps.
They concern me too. I think about especially you mentioned the standards. They have to remain the same. The physical standards, I go crazy about that. A large Northeast police department had a command staffer on a press conference when they wanted to get rid of the mile run at to get on the job. And I remember watching this individual. They were obese. I'll just add that just because it was more visual that way. And they were saying, "Oh, it's ridiculous. No cop in this city runs a mile after a bad guy." And I'm sitting there screaming at the TV, of course. I mean, screaming at the TV that it's not about running a mile. It's about being fit. It's about having cardio. It's about having strength. It's about determination. It's about, a lot of other things when you're wrestling with someone. You haven't run 2 feet, but now you're fighting for your life on the ground. Is that cardio going to help you from that mile run? I'd like to report that, yes, it does. It was incredibly frustrating, but they were getting rid of it. And I think they did get rid of that mile run. They've lost track. And part of it was because they wanted to get a larger pool of people to be able to make it through the process so that they can check the box and say, we got numbers. Look at these numbers we got. They're improving. Well, are they improving by quality or quantity? So your points are so important on that, Craig. I really hope and pray that the smart departments don't lower those standards and just say, well, maybe we need to look at other things. I've been a big voice in saying it's not about money. It isn't about money. And the proof is that some of these big cities offer tens of thousands in bonuses and they still don't get applicants. And the reason is those particular departments, I won't name it again, but let's say a big city in the Pacific Northwest offers this huge bonus and they don't get applicants. That proof, it's not about the money. It's about support of the community, support of the city council and mayor, support of a chief. And if those things aren't there, you could offer people, hundreds of thousands a year. And they're going, no, I want to work someplace where they support me. And if things go badly, I got a voice backing me. So really good. I'm so glad you brought that up about the standards and worried about some of these factors because it worries a lot of us.
Yeah, and you raise a good point too. That and this was the problem with the defund movement. It wasn't that police had lost the respect and support of the citizens they served and protected. It's they lost the support of the political leaders, the people in government that basically they were working for. And those were the people that were demeaning them and crucifying them and criticizing them. And enough is enough. I mean, who wants to work for a boss like that? And so a lot of these officers either left the profession entirely or they went to another city where they were supported. A lot of New York cops, for example, went down to Florida. And Florida is an area that supports their police officers, and the politicians down there make it very clear. And that's why a lot of cops have gone down to Florida, and the weather's not bad in the winter either, but they're getting the support they need from their political leaders down in Florida.
They do. We just met one of them in Palm Beach County. We were just on a Florida tour with the Blades of Valor tour, visited 4 different 3 departments and then Coast Guard, and we met an NYPD officer that is now a pilot with Palm Beach County. He's a wonderful guy, and we talked about this. We talked about it. The sun is, and the warmth is kind of nice too, but a lot of it has to do with working conditions.
It's interesting. Like Jack said, we talked to a lot of individual folks from individual agencies, and they all talk about the same issue that we've been talking about, the low staffing levels. I haven't really put all the numbers together in the way that you did, Craig, talking about a reduction of 40,000 folks that are needed across the U.S. It's pretty staggering to look at that. One of the other things we talk about in the podcast often is righting the ship as far as recruitment goes and retention. How do we right that ship? And we've talked about all kinds of things. What you're doing with your Citizens Behind the Badge organization is a huge asset there, and is moving the needle as far as wanting to promote a positive story of law enforcement that will draw new folks in. But from your perspective, how do we continue beyond your organization to attract people to a profession that is noble, that is so important? How do we get, I don't want to say back to where we were, but how do we right this ship in a lot of ways?
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company. For over 50 years, Robinson has been a cornerstone in vertical lift, dedicated to making helicopter missions accessible, reliable, and safe. By maintaining a vertically integrated manufacturing base in the United States, Robinson delivers practical, high-performance tools for difficult missions. Whether it's the legendary R-22, where so many pilots began their journey, the versatile R-44 and R-66, or now the new 10-seat R-88, Robinson continues to set the standard. Now through Robinson Unmanned, the company is expanding into autonomous and remotely piloted aircraft for civil, commercial, and defense sectors. Robinson Helicopter Company, committed to efficiency, reliability, and supporting your mission, whatever it may be. Visit robinsonheli.com or robinsonunmanned.com to learn more. Climb higher.
Again, I think a lot of it comes from the political leaders, the people that seem to have the microphone, and they have, I think, done a better job of realizing that, the vast majority of people do support our police, that crime was rampant when they demeaned the police, when they defunded the police. And so now we're seeing them move in a different direction. I think something else that's happening is we're getting tougher in terms of criminal justice. Where this no cash bail fiasco has really hurt the nation. The illegal immigrants have hurt the nation when it comes to crime. So we are getting tougher. We have, frankly, somebody in the White House that every day is speaking very highly of the law enforcement professionals that are working in this country. And I think that goes a long way. Words do matter. And when you had all the anti-cop rhetoric, you saw more ambush, shootings of police officers. You saw more officers getting shot and assaulted. I mean, the last few years, we've seen assaults on police officers reach levels they've never seen ever before. Last year, in 2024, I should say, there were 86,000 assaults against police officers in this country. That was the highest total ever on record. And a lot of that is because of, again, a lack of respect for law and order in this country and the people that are enforcing those laws that comes from our political leaders. They're almost acting as if it's okay if a person that gets pulled over for a traffic violation by a police officer doesn't have to comply, that you can resist. And if you don't like a particular law, then you don't have to obey it. I mean, this comes from the leaders of this country that are saying this, the leaders of the cities and the states. So their words do matter. And I think we're seeing some improvement in that area. And I think as we do, you'll see more people that will realize law enforcement is a very proud and respected profession and something to be proud of if you pin a badge over your heart and go out and serve and protect your community. So this is all going a long way. I think in terms of the officers that are still serving and the ones that have not left the profession, despite all this negativity, We have 160,000 citizens in this country, thanks to mailings that we've done, who've sent back their declarations of support and thank you letters to the police officers in their community. And we contact those agencies around the country and let them know how many people are expressing support for the work they do and that they are appreciated, they are respected and supported. And I'd like to think that maybe that's had something to do with the fact that we're retaining good officers, that they do feel appreciated much more so than they did a few years ago. And all of this, I think, is going to help get those numbers up back where they need to be and should be.
Well said. Well said, Craig. That's why you've been our voice for so long. You are really gifted at describing the things that we all see and feel, and we all appreciate it. Tell us about we've mentioned it a couple times, Heroes Behind the Badge. Tell us a little bit more about Heroes Behind the Badge, and then I'll give you some follow-ups, but give us an overview of that podcast.
When we started it, we weren't quite sure of the format. Were we just going to, it was me, first of all, and two of my board members who helped found the organization. Dennis Collins, who I used to do a CopNet radio show with. He was a radio executive down in Florida. And Dennis's daughter, Liz, is a deputy with the Orange County, Florida Sheriff's Office. Yeah. So he cares deeply about the men and women in law enforcement as I do. And Bill Erfurth is the other co-host of Heroes Behind the Badge podcast. Bill Erfurth is a 26-year veteran of the Miami-Dade Police Department and highly decorated, one of my favorite people in law enforcement. He had quite a career, record-setting number of arrests, etc. So Bill, Dennis, and I do this podcast. And when we started, we were thinking, maybe we would talk about the issues of the day, just among the three of us. And we weren't quite sure where to go with the show. But eventually it evolved into where we interviewed heroes in the law enforcement profession primarily, got to tell their stories. We've interviewed officers, one in particular was shot during the Reagan assassination attempt back in the 1980s. He was a Secret Service agent, took a bullet, saving the president's life. And John Hinckley fired several shots, and he jumped in front of the president and took that bullet. And he came on our podcast, and we got to tell his story. And I think that got the most views of any podcast we've ever done. Yeah. But we had, Jimmy Kuzak on. Jimmy's on our Law Enforcement Advisory Council. But Jimmy's story is incredible. We honored him as our Officer of the Month when I was with the Memorial Fund. He was shot 5 times during a break-in at a house in Clairton, Pennsylvania. As the bad guys started to exit the house, Jimmy was there in front of him, and the guy shot him 5 times, paralyzed from the waist down. But Jimmy is one of the most positive people I've ever met in my life, and yet, he lost the use of his legs. It's an incredible story, but we were able to bring him on, let him tell us what happened in his case. Terrible injustice was done. His killer or his shooter, thankfully he survived. The shooter was never convicted for shooting Jimmy Kuzak. I think they got him for some other crimes he had committed, but it was a strange case of justice gone awry. Those are just some examples. Steve Sund, another great example.
Yeah.
Here's the U.S. Capitol Police Chief on January 6th, 2021, right, when the riot occurred at the U.S. Capitol. And he was the chief of police. And the next day, he was forced out of his job, fired by Nancy Pelosi during a press conference. He didn't even get the word until she announced it on TV that day that he was no longer going to be the chief of police at the U.S. Capitol. He got the blame. He was the scapegoat. Yeah. And we brought him on. I read his book about what actually happened. It turns out he was the hero that day. Yeah, and he had wanted the National Guard to come and protect the Capitol. He sensed there would be trouble that day. And before the day ever arrived, he had requested the National Guard, and his requests were rejected, not only 3 days before, but also during the attack on the Capitol, he asked for the National Guard once again to come and help him defend the Capitol. And he was rejected once again. So thankfully, he was able to call his buddies at all the neighboring law enforcement agencies. About 1,200 local cops came to help save the U.S. Capitol that day and the people inside. And that was because of Steve Sund. And yet he was made to feel like he was the bad guy. He was the person that did something wrong. So these are just some of the great stories we get to tell. We, again, tell the truth,
Yep.
bring out the facts and honor the men and women who have done such great work in this country in law enforcement.
Yeah. Wow. It was a great conversation with the Chief Sund. That was a really interesting conversation.
Very telling and revealing.
Very revealing.
The story you don't get to hear in the media, right?
Oh no, they'd never report anything he has to say. They don't even like him, because he's been labeled by politicians, not by the facts. And it's a shame. But you got his story out, and his book got the story out, thankfully. Something that we ask all of our guests, and no matter what they do, whether they're authors or doctors or cops or pilots or, doing what you've done, talk about something that you either learned or that was extremely impactful from the podcast. I will preface this by saying, John and I talk about this all the time. Every guest we have on, we walk away and go, oh my gosh, I never heard that. I never knew that. Did you know that, John? And John goes, I never heard that. We learn stuff from every single guest, and I'm sure that you do too. But tell us about the most impactful that you've had from the podcasting experience from a guest.
So many. I mean, I just talked about some and the people that we've interviewed and how inspirational they are, how all of a sudden you learn the truth versus what the media had told you was the truth, certainly the false narrative. There's one guest that I've had on several times, and he is a friend. He is a colleague. He's on our Law Enforcement Advisory Council. And I didn't know him particularly well before I started this organization, but his name is David Berez. He's a member of the Police Unity Tour, Jack. You may have met him along the way. He's ridden, I think, more than a dozen years now.
Wow.
And David is a retired New Jersey police officer. And David, has confided in me, and then he wrote a book, which was very revealing, very courageous, because he exposed himself. All his weaknesses, frailties, stressful moments during his career. And he even admitted in the book that he was near suicide on 2 separate occasions and had lost 2 good friends and colleagues to suicide. And yet now David, and we interviewed him on our podcast, and he told us the whole story. He is now one of the leaders when it comes to assisting officers, when it comes to mental health and mental wellness. You know the numbers probably as well as I do, that the average police officer has 400 to 600 traumatic events that they experience during their careers. Seeing people, dead, severely injured in auto crashes, you name it, and you guys have to deal with so much trauma. The average person, people like me, maybe deal with traumatic events 2 to 3 times in our life. So the stress of the job is crushing, and you've got to do things to keep yourself well mentally, not just physically. And so David has become the leader in that area. I'm not just talking about all the stress and all the terrible things that go on, but how do you deal with it? Exercise, good health, stay away from alcohol abuse, and gratitude. I mean, he preaches gratitude, and this perhaps is something that we all take for granted. But we oftentimes get too focused on the bad things that are happening in our lives, the things that aren't going well. And yet we don't stop and think about what it is we can be grateful for. Gratitude is such an important part of positive health. If you listen to David, and I mean, my goodness, I'm guilty of it too. I mean, there are too many times when I'm not thinking about all the things in my life that I should be grateful for. I've been blessed in so many ways. And if people just stop to think about that, at the end of each day, instead of dwelling on the negative, think about all the things that are going well in your life that you've been blessed to. We're living in the greatest nation on the face of the earth. Let's start with that and go from there. And I think David has really impressed upon me that I need to do better in that regard. And I think we all do, but especially police officers who have to deal with so much of the negativity that goes on in life.
So, Craig, what is David's book? What's the title?
Well, the name of it, and I encourage people to go out and get it. It's a resilient life, a cop's journey to a purposeful life. And I think this is a book that all of us could benefit from, not just those in law enforcement. So inspirational, certainly. Here's a guy on the ropes, had to deal with a lot of pressures in his life, and he was able to come out in a good place. And now he helps others get stronger and get better in terms of mental wellness. And, we could all benefit from it.
Oh, it's one of our common themes on this podcast. We've had Dr. Tanya Glenn on a couple times. We've had Jimmy Hatch, a Navy SEAL who wrote the book, Touching the Dragon, all about mental wellness and his bouncing back from very similar circumstances that David Perez was talking about. I mean, Jimmy had a gun in his mouth after being severely wounded and bounced back. And, he teaches at Yale now. Amazing. He runs a 501c3 called Spike's Canine Fund. We love talking about the successes. Alan Mack, the author of Razor 03, we had a podcast with Alan. He dropped off the horse soldiers right after September 11th. He was at Operation Anaconda at Roberts Ridge. I mean, he was involved in the lone survivor rescue. Unbelievable human being, Alan. But when we got done recording with him, he said, we didn't get to the mental wellness stuff. So we had him back because he had to deal with a lot, as did Jimmy, as did every cop we know. So I'm so glad that you brought that up as that being so impactful for you. Because, right, John? I mean, we love to run with that topic because it's so important.
Yeah, well, Craig, one of the things you brought up about positivity, I just want to touch on for a second, because it's so easy in our profession to be negative, to be cynical about certain things. And I always talk about surrounding ourselves with people that you believe are better than you as a way to improve your life and to motivate you to do better things. And I always try and surround myself with positive people. One of my best friends in particular, we were hanging out one night, and I had made a comment. This is when I was a police officer still. I said, I got to go to work tomorrow. I wasn't really looking forward to going to work, even though I worked in aviation, had the best job that exists in law enforcement. And he goes, I get to go to work tomorrow. And that has sat with me for probably close to 10 years now, that he said that I get to go to work tomorrow. That simple statement, a reframing of whatever it is that I felt negative about, really caused me and still causes me to reflect and really think about what it is I get to do. We get to do a lot of stuff, and the things we get to do, it's all viewed through the lens of how you frame it. So I think that positivity is so critical. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Onboard Systems Hoist stays ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety. For more information, go to hoist-winch.onboardsystems.com.
That's a great word. Reframe and think about the positive aspects versus the negative. Very important.
That's right. Yeah, you mentioned grateful and gratitude. My wife loves that word. She recently had successful open heart surgery. And from that day forward, she says, I need my daily vitamin G. Gratitude, daily vitamin G. That's her gratitude. And she does. I mean, she's kept such a positive attitude about the whole thing. She wasn't, oh, woe is me. Why did this happen to me? No, it's, hey, it happened. It's successful. Life is good. I'm still here. I still have my grandkids. She's in that constant gratitude mode, which is really a good thing to be around. We all need to do it more. I'm guilty too. I don't do it enough. And she reminds me of that regularly, that I got to be better at that. I'm striving to be more like her. Great conversation about behind the Citizens Behind the Badge and the Heroes Behind the Badge podcast. That was fantastic. Thank you. So let's get more into what we wanted to touch on the first time, but certainly didn't have enough time and not enough umbrellas. So we want to learn more about you, Craig. I mean, you've done so much in your career, but we're curious, and our listeners will be curious. How did Craig get there? I mean, so start with where you grew up and walk us through your career goals and getting to college, and then we'll move on from there.
It's not as interesting as my police stories, but we'll share a little bit of it.
It's going to be great.
Now, a very, very normal, wonderful upbringing, actually. And that's something I'm very grateful for, is the parents that I had to raise me and give me the values that I have carried to this day. But I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., and ended up going to George Washington University, mainly to play baseball. But I actually got an education. I majored in journalism. I love to write. And I continue to write to this day, so I'm very pleased to have that. But, I didn't want to go into journalism as a profession because, I always saw the media as these guys that stick a microphone in people's faces after they've suffered a terrible tragedy. Somebody in their family got killed. How do you feel? And I didn't see myself doing that. So I decided, I was a political science minor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I had an internship on Capitol Hill. I worked for a congressman from West Virginia, Nick Joe Rahal. And he wasn't hiring when I graduated from college. So I went to the Congressional Placement Office, and basically they got me some interviews, and one of them was with a man named Mario Biaggi. He was a congressman from New York City. He'd been there about 10 years at that point. And so he was hiring. I was looking for a job. We got paired up. He hired me. I answered letters for a while. That was my job, legislative correspondent, and moved into a little higher rung. I became his legislative assistant for 10 years, which is a long time on Capitol Hill. Most people stay maybe 2 or 3 years, but I just loved Mario Biaggi. I loved working on Capitol Hill. For a congressman, at a young age, you're given a lot of responsibility. You're right in the seat of power of government. And it was a thrilling experience. But Mario Biaggi, besides being a great congressman, he was the most decorated cop in New York City history when he retired from the police department in 1965. He had served for 23 years. He was wounded 10 times in the line of duty and received the highest award the department can give out, the Medal of Honor for Valor. It was actually in a shootout in a car with a wise guy who had come up from behind and stuck a gun in his back and basically said, "Get in the car." The wise guy got in the back. The congressman got in the front with a friend in the passenger seat. And Biaggi, unbeknownst to the bad guy, he had a gun. And the congressman drew his weapon, turned and started firing. And he said at one point they were literally gun barrel to gun barrel. Yeah. Both of them emptied their guns, and the congressman survived. The wise guy was killed. And that was the Medal of Honor for Valor event. But he had a spectacular career. And, as you can imagine, with a guy with that kind of background, all the legislation dealing with law enforcement came through our office. He was law enforcement's champion. And I had the good fortune of working for him and having law enforcement as one of my areas of work, one of the issues among many that I handled for the congressman. And one bill became law that we introduced, and that was to build a National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, which he asked me to head up as the executive director. And that kind of got me on that path, and I've been doing it ever since. That was, roughly 1984 when the law was enacted to build the National Memorial, and we dedicated it in 1991.
Wow, it's amazing. First of all, Mario Biaggi, like you said, legendary NYPD officer. But just it's so neat that you got contact with him, ended up working for him, and it changed your life. I mean, looking back now, that really changed your life in a great way, didn't it?
What was interesting, Jack, is the memorial itself, even after we got the law enacted and I became the executive director of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, uh, that it was one job among many. It was one project among many.
Right.
I continued working for the congressman from 1984 to 1988. He left office in 1988, but in fact, I had already told him I had to leave and go to work full time for the Memorial Fund if he wanted this memorial to get built.
Right.
And so that was a tough time for me to leave the congressman, but I knew that's what needed to happen. And, as I met more survivors of the fallen, as I met more police officers, all of a sudden this project, among many, became my focus, my passion. It really started to sink into me how important this memorial was to the law enforcement profession, but also for our nation, so they'd have a better understanding and appreciation of law enforcement service and sacrifice. But it took me to meeting several survivors before I really came to grips with that reality. One in particular, Vivian Eney, now Vivian Eney Cross. Some who have visited the memorial may know her name because it sits on the wall of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial under her inscription, her quote, which is, "It is not how these officers died that made them heroes. It is how they lived." That was Vivian Eney. She lost her husband, Chris Eney, U.S. Capitol Police Sergeant, in a training exercise, shot and killed during a training exercise by one of his best friends. A very tragic incident.
Very tragic.
And Vivian was in a group of survivors that I met with to tell them about this memorial we were building in their honor, in honor of them and their loved ones. And this was back in probably 1984, thereabouts. And after I spoke to this survivor group, telling them about the memorial, I went back to my office thinking, oh, I'm sure they're all excited and thrilled to hear that. I got a call from Vivian. And Vivian basically read me a bit of the Riot Act. She was bitter because in her experience, she felt abandoned, really, by not only the members of Congress who her husband, basically died for, but by the laws of this country. For instance, at that time, we had a death benefit for state and local officers who died in the line of duty. Their families received about $50,000 from the federal government. But federal officers who died in the line of duty, like Chris Eney, did not receive any death benefit. So that was just another example of how she felt left out and abandoned by, the department and by the members of Congress and really by everyone. And so Vivian expressed those concerns to me. And fast forward, Jack, what's interesting, and I may have told you this story before, Vivian ended up becoming one of my best friends.
Yeah.
And she actually became a national president of Concerns of Police Survivors. And she sat on our board of directors for the Memorial Fund and was very involved, very influential in helping to design the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. And I think Vivian would tell you today she feels like things have changed for the better when it comes to supporting survivors of the fallen, that they do now all receive death benefits. She helped to get a law enacted allowing federal officers to get death benefits. She helped develop the Concerns of Police Survivors and all the great work they do supporting survivors of the fallen. And she helped to build that National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and the National Law Enforcement Museum. So Vivian, it's been an interesting full circle with her and me. But I must say, when it comes to people that have influenced my life and helped me understand the importance of the role I played, it was Vivian Eney right at the top of the list.
You mentioned that you had other projects. This just wasn't just the only one, but this one, like you said, grabbed you. Was it Vivian was that the event where you said, "Whoa, this is truly important," and your heart was poured into that project? Then was that the event, or was it something else?
I think it had to be that more than anything. I talk about it a lot. I'm working on a book project now, in fact, and I discuss it in my book. about the influence she had over me, and how that helped to enlighten me, really, in terms of, Vivian said, for example, that she got a handful of condolence notes from members of Congress. Really, she should have gotten one from all, 535 of them. But she did get some, but certainly not by all. And Vivian could tell you who the members were that sent those notes. I mean, that's how much it meant to her.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, wow, if a note of condolence in that situation means so much to these survivors, what is a national monument going to mean, right? It's going to make such a difference in their lives, and make them feel like, people did acknowledge their loss, did appreciate their loss, and did support them in these difficult times they're going through. And to know that your loved one is never going to be forgotten. I mean, think about it. All of us, we're going to be gone here in, another 50, 60 years, whatever it is. But, these men and women who died in law enforcement service, their names are on that memorial forever.
That's right.
We're going to be telling their stories in the National Law Enforcement Museum across the street forever. And they're going to be, that's why I call it Heroes Live Forever. To me, if you die in heroic service in law enforcement, your loss was, this early departure, but your reward is going to be eternal remembrance by the men and women of this nation. So, that's what Vivian impressed upon me, the importance of that memorial in that respect. And I think after I met more and more survivors, that message just sunk in deeper and deeper. People like Martha Wood, I mentioned, people that have gone through this terrible loss and have come out, now helping others. This is a great story, and I know how much that memorial has meant to them.
Yeah.
And, that means so much to me personally, to know that I had a hand in at least helping to build that memorial and build that museum.
I've heard survivors say those exact words, that my biggest fear is that they will be forgotten. I mean, I've heard them say that sentence, multiple survivors. And then they get to Washington, D.C., and they get to the memorial, and it hits them in a powerful way that, wow, that fear is now gone. I mean, instantly, it's like, there's their name. That, like you said, Craig, that is going to be there forever. The museum's going to tell the story to go with that name forever. And that is a comforting feeling for a survivor. You've heard it thousands of times. I've heard it a handful, and it impacted me. So that's the power of that memorial. It really is. And I'm really curious about this. Where did the idea for the National Memorial start? I imagine it's with Representative Biaggi, but is there a specific story to go with the initial conversation or the initial legislation that you can share with us?
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Onboard Systems Hoist stays ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety. For more information, go to hoist-winch.onboardsystems.com.
Meet Becker Avionics DVCS 6100 Plus, a world-class digital intercom delivering crystal clear mission-ready audio. The DVCS 6100 Plus supports up to 12 transceivers and offers immersive 3D audio and NVIS compatibility. Designed to be scalable, dependable, and prepared to support military or commercial operations in the toughest of high workload mission environments. Visit us at beckerusa.com.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company. For over 50 years, Robinson has been a cornerstone in vertical lift, dedicated to making helicopter missions accessible, reliable, and safe. By maintaining a vertically integrated manufacturing base in the United States, Robinson delivers practical, high-performance tools for difficult missions. Whether it's the legendary R-22, where so many pilots began their journey, the versatile R-44 and R-66, or now the new 10-seat R-88, Robinson continues to set the standard. Now through Robinson Unmanned, the company is expanding into autonomous and remotely piloted aircraft for civil, commercial, and defense sectors. Robinson Helicopter Company, committed to efficiency, reliability, and supporting your mission, whatever it may be. Visit robinsonheli.com or robinsonunmanned.com to learn more. Climb higher.
We hope you enjoyed this episode with Craig Floyd. Craig's impact on the survivors of our fallen law enforcement brothers and sisters is truly profound. Over the years, he has met with thousands of survivors, standing beside them, advocating for them, and ensuring their voices are heard. For decades, he has been a constant presence in honoring the fallen and supporting those left behind. His passion and dedication are evident in everything he's touched, from the memorial to the museum, and now through his continued work with Citizens Behind the Badge. If you'd like to learn more, visit behindthebadge.org. We can't thank Craig enough for joining us once again on the Hangar Z podcast and for sharing his story, his perspective, and for his unwavering commitment to this mission. If you'd like to support the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, head over to nleomf.org. One great way to get involved is by supporting someone participating in the Police Unity Tour. Consider donating directly to a rider. And if you're looking for something even more meaningful, start training now and sign up with a local chapter and take part in next year's ride to Washington, D.C. It's an incredible experience and one that truly honors those who gave everything. It is life-changing. I cannot say that enough. It's something that you should do. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our sponsors for making all these conversations possible. Stay safe, and we'll catch you the next time on the Hangar Z podcast.